Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Grasp the Cloud with Mongo and Konger. I am Mongo, aka Matt Hester, and I'm joined by
Conger. No, I said Congo, Conger. It's been a rough morning
it's
already.
a rough morning already, and better yet, we're joined by the fabulous Keith Mayer. So, Keith, why don't you say hello?
Hey, everybody. Hey, thanks for having me on the show today.
Oh, you're welcome, Keith. And I've known Keith. I was trying to think, how long have we known each other? Probably on and off for 15 years, I think, Keith.
Yeah, probably 15. Yeah, at least 15 years.
Yeah, we traveled
Yeah.
around all the time with the old MSAM teams and then the evangelist teams, and you're doing something exciting. Why don't you tell the folks a little bit about what you're doing now?
Yeah. So after we last worked together, I moved over into our engineering team for a few years and helped some of our really large customers with validation of the architecture they're using for their for their large Azure application deployments. And then most recently, I moved into a role as chief architect in our worldwide customer success organization. And so I provide technical guidance and leadership for the cloud solution architects and customer engineers that we have worldwide across our field teams that in turn are working with our customers on their solutions that they're deploying to the Azure cloud.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, what have been some of the more interesting combinations of technologies? One of my favorite stories that I tell when I'm teaching my class is like, whenever you think of Azure, do you think of rhinoceroses? Because there was a solution that was built that actually helped save poaching of rhinoceroses. Anything cool like that?
There's a lot of cool solutions that are more industry focused. We've got oil and gas customers that are using Azure for tracking oil pipelines and subterranean oil drilling experiments and whatnot. We've got retail customers that are leveraging Azure to get better intelligence over as customers enter a retail store where their eyes are scanning and looking for items and using that to better track placement of merchandise within their stores. A lot of really interesting technology uses for the cloud, for AI and ML and data as well. One of the trends that we're seeing is a lot of large customers transforming their core development teams to really taking sort of an API first approach and then using tools like Power Apps and with their business units to do low code, no code development of business solutions. And so they have their business analysts effectively writing the next generation of business applications, talking to APIs that the professional developers on their IT teams are building for the backends that they have sitting on top of their large data and repositories and AI modules.
Oh, that's fantastic. And so one of the things, Keith, you and I have a somewhat similar technical background, and by the way, I am not saying Sarah. I'm for the record. He is way smarter than me on this topic,
He
and
sounds it, right?
yeah,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, he
Yeah,
definitely sounds way smarter
yeah.
than me on Azure. But more importantly, how do you keep up with all the changes? I mean, I'm sure when you took this job, you didn't say, "Hey, we're going to use APIs to gather business intelligence on people's eye placement, so we can put our bottle higher up in the shelf or make the label a little bit larger." How do you go about learning these technologies, or when that conversation starts with a customer? How do you start profiling it out so you can actually get some real solutions in place?
Yeah, that's a great question. The cloud is changing so rapidly. I mean, on any given day, we're literally deploying hundreds of updates to our cloud services for either fixes or new functionality, new capabilities, or whatnot. And so it's really rapidly evolving. And so I think thinking about I think that the underpinning of part of your question is, from a skills standpoint, how should cloud oriented IT professionals be thinking about what type of framework they should be orienting their skills towards? And so typically what we found over the last several years for our cloud architects is is looking for a transition towards more of what we call a T-shaped IT professional. By T, I mean the letter T. When you think about the way the letter T looks with a kind of the horizontal bar at the top and the vertical bar in the middle, what we mean by that is the horizontal bar is really representing having breadth across cloud platform like Azure. And then the vertical bar is those areas of passion where an IT professional or a developer has areas that they want to go, one or more areas that they want to go super deep on. And taking that type of an approach, as a professional advances and tries to stay current, taking advantage of our Azure update feeds to stay on top on a daily basis, setting aside even if it's 5 minutes of your day just to look at the update feed and see what are the latest updates that have been announced and deployed to the Azure cloud to get that broad awareness, and then using that to kind of identify, okay, for these areas, I want to go a little bit deeper and understand how that plugs into my broad understanding of the cloud, kind of that how it augments that horizontal bar. And then here's a couple of the areas that I want to go super deep in. And in terms of going super deep, usually what I find, one of the benefits of the cloud really is that it democratizes access to technology. If you think about having to do a lab environment in the old days that you and I grew up in, Matt, it could be
It feels like,
thousands and
yeah, when
thousands
we
of dollars of expense, right? In building out your lab environment. Now in the cloud, you can spin something up quickly, go pretty deep from a hands-on perspective, and spin it down when you're not using it. And along the way, not only are you learning that new area, but you're also probably gaining some good skills around automation and infrastructure as code and DevOps, in being able to build how you're spinning things up and spinning things down for your own learning benefits so quickly. So it's the cloud really, I think, helps to accelerate learning and depth learning in some ways just by providing very quick access to technology.
Yeah, and I think that's where what's fascinated me is I think your vertical bar over the years has changed of what you go passionate or deep in. What's your hot spots right now? What are some things that you're really just super uber interested in and you can't wait for a customer to say, I want to build in this because you're like, I got that ready to go.
Yeah, a lot of the work that I've been focused on over the last 6 to 9 months has been really helping customers think through what it means to architect and operate applications across multiple clouds, portable applications, right? That they can develop and be able to deploy to Azure or on-prem or whatnot. And a lot of the reason for that is we've got global customers that have, in some cases, needs to deploy applications in all over the world. So it certainly takes advantage of the many different regions that we have our own Azure data centers in, or our new forthcoming edge zones cropping up in. But in some cases, they have needs to deploy in such remote areas where there's not a public cloud presence today that they have to deploy it in a data center of their own or in a colo of their own. And so as they think about developing and operating these applications, really looking at approaches they can take to isolate the application business logic from the underlying plumbing and have a consistent way of managing and monitoring and operating those applications. So, we think about the investments that we as Microsoft have made with the Cloud Native Compute Foundation group, and around areas like Dapper, the distributed application runtime for Kubernetes clusters that allow you to really focus on exposing services more generically to applications so that the application can be made more portable. And then the investments that we're making on more of the infrastructure side around Azure Arc for being able to deploy and manage Kubernetes and containers and data services, whether it's on Azure or in your own data center or in another public cloud provider, but still be able to manage them consistently through the Azure control plane. So those are some great areas that I've been spending a lot of time around lately.
Oh, that's fantastic. So when you hand this project off to the customers, obviously you can't, as much as you probably want to, you want to stay with those customers. How do you educate them, or are they with you the whole process and they're learning as we're learning? Or how do you when you hand it off, how do you teach them how to use the stuff so you can be confident that it's just not going to last a year and go away?
Yeah, that's a great question. We look at it as a joint partnership journey with our customers as we explore a solution that they're looking to build and deploy into the cloud. And so initially, as part of that, for the first few steps of that journey, we help to identify, are there some foundational areas where more traditional training may be needed to get the customers' teams up to a level where they're conversant with the technologies that we're going to be leveraging, and identify that and help put forth a training plan for getting their folks up to speed. But then as we go through the process, the customers' teams are with our own cloud solution architects and customer engineers every step of the way, so that they're learning about those key decision points along the journey through initial discovery, design, proof of concept, pilot into implementation, so that once they have the application running in production, they're comfortable with being able to manage, support, operate, continue to operate that application, as well as continue to grow its base of features from a development perspective.
Yeah, and it's with it moving so fastly, as Sarah and I see, and we talk with our customers all the time. I mean, it seems like her and I giggle when we open up the portal and we're doing a live demo, and all of a sudden the portal's different. They've added something new, and we're like, "Oh, what's that do?" And what's going on? So, Sarah, I remember a couple times like that. Or what do you do, Sarah? Because you and I don't always get to teach together. What are some of the things that you do when you see those portal buttons hop up?
I sit there and go, yeah, so that's new. Wasn't there last week? But hey, ever evolving, it's the cloud. Get used to it, people. No.
And Keith, can you say that to our large customers? Is that a phrase? Hey, just get used to it. Suck it up, Buttercup. This is how it's going to be.
It's definitely a learning curve for a lot of customers. A lot of customers have IT teams that grew up in the era of well-structured, scheduled maintenance windows around on-prem data centers that they use to deploy changes and updates around, and getting accustomed to the concept that there is so much that's changing and evolving, that changes are being deployed all the time, and looking at those new features and capabilities or changes and things like the portal as a gift from the cloud. What has the cloud gifted us today? Let's learn more about this, and learn about the reason that it's there and the advantages it provides. I think is a great positive. It also, though, is a learning curve for application development teams who have never really in the traditional world had to think about how do we design an application to be reliable in a very dynamic environment like the cloud, like public cloud platforms provide. And so, some of what we've been doing from a customer success standpoint is taking the core engineering principles that our own internal cloud teams use for deploying applications reliably, securely, at scale, and rolling those into our well-architected framework, which is a published set of guidance that customers can leverage for looking at the key principles that they can bake into their applications design and development efforts to make their applications reliable and resilient in a dynamic public cloud environment.
Hey Keith, do you ever find like when you're dealing with a customer that you get a lot of pushback on what you're recommending? Like sometimes I know when I was a consultant for many years, coming in and telling a customer this is what we recommend, a lot of times they're like, no, we're not ready to do that. And then you get a lot of pushback, but there's no other way to do it. So how do you deal with that if you ever come across something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Oftentimes, I found that pushback stems from some misconceptions or some former
Lack of
understanding from the on-prem
understanding. Yeah.
world that may not apply to the cloud itself. And so generally the approach I take is to take a step back and really understand, kind of meet the individual where they're at from a learning standpoint, understand where they're coming from, what their concerns are, and how those concerns may be addressed differently in a public cloud environment, and then position it that way of really understanding, acknowledging their concerns, but helping to move them down that path of here's how those concerns or those requirements are addressed from a public cloud standpoint, because it is in
Yeah,
some ways so different from the on-prem world.
yeah, because normally a lot of times, especially when I was a consultant, when you see that pushback, it wasn't because they didn't want to do it, it's because they didn't know how to do it. So they're afraid to jump in. And that's the whole thing. That's why I got into training, is because I was realizing, there's so much people that don't understand a product, that once they understand it, then they accept it and are willing to use it. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely see that a lot.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And we actually see that with a lot of initial kind of lift and shift, quote unquote lift and shift migrations to the cloud,
Yeah.
right? Where they're trying to treat the cloud as though it's a hosted data center, instead of a public cloud environment. And so typically for those types of engagements, we try to focus on the lower hanging fruit, the less critical departmental applications, right? Where they can be more easily lifted and shifted to the cloud, and then look at, for those mission critical applications, what's really required, in terms of some light refactoring or some better architecture in order to really make it resilient and reliable in a public cloud platform. So yeah.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite sayings when I teach is like, just think of Azure as another site, right? To think of it as another data center, another extension to your organization, and treat it like that. Because really that's what you're doing. So not to be, trying to teach them not to be afraid.
Yep. Hmm.
Yeah, well, and
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
I think it was
Embrace the cloud differences. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, embrace our diversity with what we have there. But Sarah and I were in a class, I think it was you, Sarah, where we had a customer say, internally, we think IaaS and moving virtual machines is legacy technologies,
Yes, always
and
get that.
we're just going right to PaaS. We're skipping over IaaS, got that low hanging fruit, and going into that. Are you starting to see that trend? More and more people just wanting to develop onto the cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, and,
Good.
and usually that's for organizations where they may have already gone down the IaaS path with some initial migrations, and now they have some net new applications that they're looking to develop, or some existing applications that they know they're looking to refactor and add new capabilities to. We see a lot of, the transition over the last few years has been from kind of infrastructure as a service, VMs, into containers, and now even onto serverless technologies, right? Where development teams are being pushed by business organizations more and more to do more with less, to be able to accelerate development timelines, accelerate time to value for new applications, that the more they can take advantage of the cloud without having to manage underlying infrastructure, oftentimes the faster they can move, right? And be able to deliver new solutions. And it allows their development teams to focus more and more of their time on business value instead of on kind of the plumbing of infrastructure, right? Underneath it.
Keith, I think you just nailed something right there. You just came up with the logo, serverless. Do more with less. Let's
Yeah,
patent
there you
that.
go.
Well, wait,
Yep.
that nails on the chalkboard for me over here. I hate that term serverless. You know, I hate
I
that term,
know.
Sarah. It's like
Same.
everything runs on a server. It's server management list. That's what
Yeah,
it technically
exactly.
is. Ugh. There's not a magic cloud that just runs code. There's a server behind that cloud somewhere. You're gonna get me. You got me all fired up, Sarah. I was having a nice, relaxed morning. I
Serverless,
hadn't walked my
serverless,
dog.
serverless.
Serverless is coming out there. But I think that's the big trend, right? Is that people are moving away. They don't want to manage servers anymore. I mean,
Oh,
that's
Right.
that's the part that I just chuckle whenever I see that term. And I know it's an industry term and I just got to deal with it. But it's one of those areas when you think about that technology, Keith, by the way, the T analogy is, I think that's the
I love
letter.
it.
Architect should start with the letter T now. We got to figure out a way to change the English
Yeah.
dictionary to get T as the first letter in architect. It's kind of in there somewhere. It's actually the last letter. Oh, I got something. Brain's working on this one. But
Oh no,
Keith, when
just
you think
keep
about
going though.
that vertical thing,
This isn't.
it,
We're in trouble.
if somebody was to come up to you, Keith, and say, "Hey, I need to learn something in Azure," maybe one or two things. What's that vertical T you tell them? What's the hot trend that you would say go about learning, and any recommended resources we have uh, that you would give them?
Yeah. So, if it's broadly just thinking about where they should focus their time, I would say, AI and ML is driving a lot of new initiatives that we see in an industry focus today. And that's a really interesting area for people to begin exploring. And it's easy, within Azure to spin up some basic experience. I mean, we have a whole set of ML libraries and assets that can be used to spin up and play around with different experiments and get to know it better yourself, right? It's really easy to get started, and I know there's some great online learning that's available as well through our existing Azure learning paths that are available. So I'd encourage people to explore that area, particularly if you're already a data focused person. Leveraging data um, through AI and ML opens up a whole new realm of possibilities.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the areas that I've gotten into. That's where, I chuckle about Azure and rhinoceroses. That's a huge part of that scenario. And that's I think, close to a 2-year old solution now that we have developed. We always like to ask, especially when we get Microsoft employees on the phone, what's your favorite Microsoft memory, Keith? You've been here for how many years? You've been here for what, 15 years now? Over 15, right?
Almost 15. Yeah, yeah, almost 15 years. Yeah. So favorite
Wow.
Microsoft memory. I really I miss the old days. There's so much that's done virtually these days. Through Teams and email and whatnot, podcasts and everything. It's really, but I still miss the old days of being in front of an audience and when we presented at whether it was Ignite or Ready or even just large regional events, to have that thrill of interacting directly with a live audience and being able to see light bulbs go off and help people understand technology. There was a lot of fun involved with that, right? It was a it was called an event for a reason, right? It was a whole event more so than just the education portion of it.
So your biggest memory is anything before 2019, pretty much.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Well, yeah.
Stupid
Well,
COVID.
and I want to note that a lot of that time we were working together on the same team, having a blast being with our customers. But I think that's something Sarah and I miss. Sarah, any last questions before we let Keith get out of here?
No, I just want to say, Keith, I've never met you up until now, and it's great to know you. And I'm going to pick your brain if you don't mind every once in a while. So you might see an email coming in from Sarah Kong. That's me. But yeah, thank you for joining us. It's great to hear the
Oh yeah,
customer
sure thing.
side. I
Yep.
really
Thanks. It was
enjoy
a lot of
hearing it.
fun. Thanks,
So
guys.
thank you.
And Keith, on behalf, once again, thank you as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just wrap up this podcast. Hope everybody enjoyed learning how we learn and how one of our chief architects at Microsoft learns and applies technology on a daily basis. So thank you so much for joining us.